So, shall we start? Today is August 18th. I'm Bob Rindy. This is Burton Weast. And Burton, we're supposed to start off with just a little bit of your life and history in Oregon to sort of set the context, but we're going to quickly just talk about the land use program.
How I got involved in planning was kind of a fun story. I had gotten out of the service. I had a degree, and I had gotten out of the Navy in Vietnam, and I decided to go to Southern Oregon College for summer school. I had been admitted to U of L, or OSU, in a resource economics program, and so I was in Ashland. Took a class in geography and human geography. And
what year is this?
This is 1970, and I just loved the class. And so my father owned a appliance store, plumbing shop in Brookings, Oregon. And the shopping center he was in at Christmas had a party. And I came over from Ashland. I'd finished the term and was getting ready to head to Corvallis in January. And he invited me to come to the Christmas party. And I went to the Christmas party, and there 3 county commissioners were there. This was in the days that they didn't have to worry about quorums, all the rules, and obviously. So Oregon had passed a bill in 1969, Senate Bill 10, that required every county to have a planning director. And I had never lived in Brookings. My parents had moved there when I went off to college and had started this plumbing business. And so I was sitting talking to one of the county commissioners, and he said, do you know anything about planning? And I said, well, I took this class in geography, and they mentioned planning. And he said, well, they passed this stupid-ass law that you've got to hire a planner, and we don't need one, but we got to have one. And you're a local boy, right? And I'd never lived in Brookings in my life.
So the next thing you know, you're the planner.
Well, yeah. So I go up Monday, and they say, all right, you're hired, and I'm now the planning director for Curry County. And true story. I should have brought the picture to hold it up to the camera. My office, my first office, it said planning director, janitor. I shared an office full of mops and brooms and everything with the janitor at the Curry County Courthouse in the basement.
Well, that's pretty much still the way they do it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's probably true. So anyway, that was and I literally knew very little about planning.
Incredible.
So I did a crash course. I mean, I literally did a crash course. They had a planning commission. They had an attorney, Fred Starkweather, who kind of ran the planning commission and was real good. He was an attorney and helped me a lot. So long story short, within a year, like being all good bureaucrats, I had grown the operation. We had a different office, and we started. I hired 2 or 3 planners. The first person I hired, incidentally, was Jim Hendricks, who is now the planning director in Woodburn.
Is that right?
He was the very first person I hired.
Amazing. And
make the whole thing long story, he now rents from me in a townhouse in Charbonneau, and we've stayed friends all these years. And so anyway, that's how I got in the planning business. I was also the county sanitarian, and had some adventures there. I got shoved into a 6-foot deep test hole by an angry farmer one time, and that was life in Curry County.
Well, that must have been pretty much a full-time job then.
Oh, it was an absolutely full-time job, and that's where we were. How I got here, and then I'll go back to LCDC in its beginnings. How I got here in Salem and became a lobbyist on land use stuff was I had come up here for a couple of hearings when they were during the land use frenzy, is the only way I do it. I had got asked by the counties because, ironically, Curry County had an adopted comprehensive plan.
When you got there?
When I got there.
Oh,
and it was, it didn't meet, but in those days it was a plan, and it was something.
And they had zoning.
The county was zoned, all the forestry grazing was zoned, everything. So we were kind of a model, particularly on the coast. Walt Schroeder, who was later a state representative, was the forestry or the OSU agent, farm extension agent, and he was a big believer in planning. And so he had worked and worked and worked to get this plan. So we were kind of a model, and I got, through AOC conferences and stuff like that, got to know other people. So when Ted Halleck decided to have a hearing on Senate Bill 100,
Jump ahead to 73.
yeah, I'm jumping ahead now to 73, the counties picked me to go up and represent counties in the hearing. And the hearing was...
And there probably wasn't an AOC back then.
Well, there was, but it was not like it is today. The sophistication level of the league and AOC was much different. The hearing was held at the Portland City Hall in the Portland City Council chambers. And there was me and a couple other guys, and I don't remember who they were, but they were from around the state. One was a city. And we were asked to come up and testify about what we do at the local level and what we saw would be good to be in Senate Bill 100 and all that stuff. And so I was supposedly the first to speak. And there's all these TV cameras from all the Portland TV stations there. And I'm nervous as heck, and so Ted calls the hearing to order. We later got to be friends, but Ted calls the hearing to order, and he says, our first speaker is Burton Weast from Curry County. And he goes like that, Curry County. And just when he said that, all the TV lights come on, all the cameras come on, and Ted launches into this speech about the land raping going on in the Oregon coast, and Curry County is just typical of how our beautiful beaches and lands are being destroyed. And just a rant.
Because I've heard the Tom McCall speech about what is it, 20 miserable miles and such, but I haven't heard
Lincoln
about.
City. This was a hearing. This was a regular legislative hearing, and all everything goes. I'm stunned because I was up there proud. I thought, hell, we got a comprehensive plan. What are you talking? We're zoned. Washington County isn't zoned, but we're zoned. And then he gets done with his rant, and all the lights go off, all the TV cameras leave, everybody leaves, and there I was. So that was my introduction to the legislature.
Well, at least you were on the front page with what you unloaded with in that moment.
Yeah, so that was my introduction. So
wow.
I apparently comported myself pretty well.
So that was probably one of the opening salvos of whole, Senate Bill 100.
Yeah, building up support,
Sure.
downtown Portland, building up support for, all the land raping. And a lot of people don't remember that. That was a time when the governor, when legislative leadership, lots of people were just talking about Oregon's being destroyed. And, it was a very strong economic time. So there were a lot of, the growth was really starting to boom in Oregon.
Sure.
But the whole Senate Bill 100 thing was a political process. It was a PR job, and I'm not being negative. That's just what it was. It was just this massive kind of PR job, which led up to LB Day. And
even
Fred
today, I think
people.
somewhere I saw it recently. It's all printed up, a little speech by Tom McCall, where he talks about coastal condominium and such. And I got some of the impression of what you just described. It hadn't occurred to me that it wouldn't have just been Tom McCall. There would have been others that.
In fact, in my view, Tom McCall was not one of the players that put Senate Bill 100 together. And I don't know, you've talked to Fred and some of those other people. People like LB Day and Hector McPherson and Ted Halleck to a certain extent, and Steve Bauer, who was the deputy director of LCD or of League of Oregon Cities. Those were the guys that sat in the back room and negotiated the bill. So if you ask me, and I'm just one voice, but if you ask me who's responsible for this thing passing the legislature, I think the governor was a great front man, but the people who did it and who wrote the bill and did it, I give Hector and LB Day would be my, and Fred and those guys, that would be my vote for who did it.
So did you have further legislative involvement?
Well, yeah, because what happened after that was the League of Oregon Cities offered me a job, because I apparently hadn't totally made a buffoon out of myself. So they offered me a job, and I turned them down because I had a new baby. My parents lived in Brookings. My sister was going to high school in Brookings, and she's quite a bit younger than me. And why do I want to come up here in this zoo? I had that wonderful impression of Salem politics. So I didn't participate beyond that in the writing of Senate Bill 100. But after it passed, shortly after it passed, and Arnold Cogan was made the director of LCDC, they started a dog and pony show around the state to write the goals.
Right.
And one of their first stops was Curry County. And they came down and met with the commissioners and me and around a conference table and did a very excellent briefing of what they were up to. Of course, the way they described the goals and all of that turned out to be, for a variety of reasons we can talk about later and you probably heard, turned to be different. The goals were supposed to be just general guidelines that jurisdictions were supposed to just address. Mm-hmm. It was never intent that they had the force of law. It was never intended, any of the things that have happened were never really on the radar. It might have been on the radar of some people, but the presentation was not that way.
Didn't reveal that.
Didn't reveal that, and I don't think.
Well, and California had just such an advisory system
yes,
at that time.
Yes, the California Coastal Commission, I think, had gotten going at that time. And so it wasn't ill will or lying to anybody. That's what people thought the program was going to be. So they came down, and we had a very good meeting with the commissioners and myself and Arnold and his staff. So they went out to the fairgrounds and did a presentation to about 200 local people, a public meeting where everybody came. And that didn't go so well. That immediately was a hostile, I just got to say it was a hostile crowd. Bob Van Leer was the publisher of the Curry County Reporter, and he was the Mark Twain of Curry County. And he got up in the meeting. Everybody was kind of polite for the first half hour. And then he got up and made this impassioned speech about, you're lying to us. This is how it always starts. It starts with general words and phrases, and then it always turns into a law, then it turns into a rule, and then we lose all our authority. We lose all our ability to make Curry County look like we want it. It'll look like Portland wants it.
And he said that from, what kind of experience would he have had in that?
Well, he was
obviously something.
He was 60 years old, and he had seen a lifetime. He'd been a journalist all his life, very conservative. And he just, in his mind, he just had seen this before. This is just a foot in the door, and pretty soon, well, the presenter wasn't Arnold. The presenter was Cindy Banzer. Cindy later became a state representative and a good friend of mine. And Cindy basically got all teary-eyed and was ready to break. It was awful. It was awful what was going on. And I was embarrassed. The commissioners were embarrassed. And it was just awful. And so the Dog and Pony Show left town with this total disaster in Curry County. One of the people that was at this meeting was a guy who had just newly arrived in Curry County, and his name was Mike Fitzgerald, and he was a PR agency owner in San Diego who had sold out and bought a huge house on the cliff overlooking the ocean outside of Brookings, north of Brookings. And he sensed a political issue. And he sensed that this is it. This is how I'm going to be a congressman. And so he leaped on this and made a huge, and began, and the commissioners were basically supportive of this. They had adopted a comprehensive plan, and they weren't anti-planning. And Mike Fitzgerald declared his candidacy at some point. I had months run together, but declared his candidacy and was running against planning. So my mother raised me reasonably well, and I could see the handwriting on the wall. So Steve Bauer, who is now the director at the League of Oregon Cities, called me up. It was kind of kismet, and said, we still haven't filled that land use lobbyist position. Were you interested in doing it? And I said, you know what? I'm ready to move.
There you go.
And so I wound up at the League of Oregon Cities.
So what year was this?
70.
I think the goals were adopted in '74. So
When I got up here, we were working on the guidelines,
Uh-huh.
and that's what he wanted me for, was to work on the guidelines. So it had to be '76, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
And it was '76 because my first session with the league was '77. But it was before the session, and they were working on the guidelines, and that whole process had started. And we thought the guidelines was where the rubber was going to hit the road.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How wrong that's turned out.
We hardly, we paid attention to the goals,
Uh-huh.
but they were pretty well done, and nobody thought the goals was going to be the issue. And the process for the goals was relatively friendly. The process for the guidelines were really interesting. I mean, I was in there arguing, and Fred Venata from the Home Builders was in there arguing, and lots of people were in there arguing. And so that was my first, while I never directly, other than this hearing in Brookings, was in the goals, I did work all the way but through the guidelines on the behalf
So
of the cities.
this is the first I have heard that, and I should have known this, but apparently then the goals were adopted and the guidelines was a sort of a second run at the same thing.
It was
and
to
then,
explain what we meant.
And so then the LCDC adopted each of those guideline
Yes.
statements and put them in the goals.
Yeah, and that was supposed to be what it means. It's great to say preserve, protect farmland. What's that mean?
Yeah.
And the guidelines were supposed to flesh that out more. But it was somewhere in my mind's faulty now, but it was somewhere in this period, maybe I think it was right after the guidelines were adopted, that Thousand Friends did a lawsuit that resulted in the courts saying the goals had the force of law. And to all of us who had worked in local government and had been a participant in this, a positive participant in this process, that was wait a minute. That's when we all said at the league and the AOC, that's not the way this was supposed to be. And that's when you felt a lot of people in the state felt like they'd been lied to.
Interesting. So at some point, there was a law passed that says the guidelines are advisory.
Yeah, well, that was in reaction to the goals being made
Yeah.
with the force of law. So then everybody panicked, well, God, the goals are bad enough. What's going to happen if the guidelines aren't guidelines, if they're statutes?
Yes.
So then a bill was passed. I believe, in fact, I know I worked on that. I just forgot about it.
So then the cities at that time, and as their lobbyists, you must have sat with a group of them that's coming up with their policy as to what they wanted to see the state land use program become and put forth their position, which...
The league and AOC weren't, at this point, weren't hostile or screaming and yelling or doing anything. Others may disagree with me, but I felt that it was Gordon Foltz was the lobbyist for the counties, and hopefully you're interviewing him.
Well, I might not be.
I'm
sure somebody is.
I hope
Yes.
somebody is, because he was the county guy, and he was there very, very much from the very beginning. He was already working at AOC in '69 when Senate Bill 10 passed. But it was more, I guess I got to say, befuddlement, because we didn't know where this thing was going. I mean, it had already kind of reversed itself. It was no longer, let's work for the good of the world and and do the right thing and zone our counties and cities and stuff. Now it's the law, and Thousand Friends is threatening lawsuits, and it had changed on us to an extent.
So wasn't a lot of the conversation though over farm and forest land and cities, of course, probably we're staring at Goal 14 or was that the case?
I wasn't all wrapped up in farm and forest. That was more of a county issue. I was more concerned about city issues, comprehensive plans, the requirements for comprehensive plans, and the first comprehensive plans that got approved, as you know, were very simple. They were not this big.
No, that's before my time.
Yeah,
you're still before my time then, but
sorry.
But I know that sooner or later we're starting to get cities in there.
Yeah, and the cities started coming in. Port Orford, which was in Curry County, was the first city on the coast to have a acknowledged comprehensive plan. And I had worked on it before I left, and it got continued on. In fact, I think Jim Hendricks was the one that wrapped that up. And we're worried But I didn't stay with the cities very long, and because what happened, I left the cities in, I only worked one session for the cities. I was at the League of the Cities 3 years.
So you worked that legislative session
I worked
too?
the 77 session, but I didn't work beyond that. I was up here for the 75 and then 77 session that I actually worked at the League. And what happened was, huge issue for the League in the 77 session. They had two big issues, annexation, and the other one was the mobile home guys. Wanted a bill that said mobile homes could go anywhere in single-family zones. Well, the city mothers and fathers went crazy over that. It was going to destroy our neighborhoods and everything else. And so that's what I spent, that and annexation issues is what I spent most of the session, not LCDC. There was kind of a...
So somewhere in there was a ballot measure, I think, going on.
Well, there'd been, there was lots of ballots.
A couple of them.
Yeah.
But 77 session, so what was, so that was the gist of the fighting over land use in the 77
Well,
session?
I don't want to say that, but my recollection of what I was agonizing over wasn't LCDC. It was annexation and mobile homes.
And what was the flavor of the quote annexation issue then?
The annexation issue was cities didn't understand that, like Oklahoma, they ought to be able to put their boundaries anywhere they wanted. And they ran into all kinds of different people that had concerns about that. People that didn't like taxes, counties that didn't want cities growing, and all of this stuff. And I unfortunately had to carry the banner of cities, and in all honesty, it was a banner that wasn't very easily carried. They weren't much interested in, at that time, in rules about how you expand, and I think a lot of it, hadn't thought of this till just now, but a lot of it was probably before all these urban growth boundaries and everything get into play.
There probably were hardly any of them there, except for Port Orford.
There were, yeah, and I think, I hadn't thought of this, I didn't put the, I seem to recall a lot of it was, let's beat this process, let's get our city limits growing. But in fairness, this had been an issue for a long time with cities in Oregon, and it still is, annexation policy still. So, but the thing that I spent all my time on, because annexation wasn't going anywhere, was mobile homes and the placement of mobile homes. Quick story, I lost 10 pounds during the session. It was awful fighting the mobile home guys. They had a pack. We didn't. They had this lawyer, Mark O'Donnell, who part of the history of LCDC, and they just worked and worked and worked, and they had this other guy's name I can't remember.
And this was before Don Miner.
This is before Don Miner. There was a guy right before him, and I beat him. And it was one of the toughest things. It really taught me a lot, hardcore lobbying. That's where I learned to lobby, was on that bill on mobile homes in cities. And I beat him, and at the end of the session, the Manufactured Housing Association sent their guy, whose name I don't remember, to Hawaii for 2 weeks, thanking him for the work he did, and he lost. I went to the League conference in Portland at the Hilton, went into the mayor's meeting and got just reamed the entire meeting. How could it have gotten a hearing? Why did you let it get a hearing? I just got reamed. And I walked out of that mayor's meeting. I was so mad I couldn't see straight. And Fred Venata is there. And Fred says, let's go over and have lunch. And so I go over and Fred says, we need a land use lobbyist. The home builders need, in Portland, you'd be in Portland, executive vice president, and you would be the land use lobbyist because I've just got all these other issues and I'll train you, work with you. He knew me well, obviously. So the bottom line is January of 1988, or 1978, January of 1978, I became the Home Builders of Metropolitan Portland's vice president, and at the time was the 5th largest home builders in the United States, over 1,000 members.
Now, in terms of land use, that was that time was on the verge of some pretty major things.
Yes.
St. Helens policy,
yes,
sometime shortly thereafter. And a lot of things that sort of fleshed Goal 10 into.
We had a ton of Goal 10 stuff, and I was the home builders guy all of a sudden. But the big issue for me was, and for the home builders in Portland, and also for the state, because this was the first big, real urban growth boundary battle, was the Metro UGB. Popped up at this time. And I'll never forget, wished I'd have saved it now. When you get old, you think of this stuff, but Willamette Week at the time, which was a newspaper print publication, full page, on their front page had a pro and a con on the what should be in the metro urban growth boundary and where it should be and how much land should be on it, with me and Henry Richmond.
Wow.
And it was a huge controversy up there, and Henry and I'd go to the editorial board at the Oregonian, and there were, editorials flying around, and it was a huge issue. But all through that, though, Henry and I got to be great friends because we really liked each other and we really respected. We would take tours of the proposed line for the Metro UGB together.
Yeah.
We went together and talked about it.
So it hadn't actually been adopted. That was the Crag boundary, the initial?
This was Crag, yeah. And Metro didn't exist yet. And so this was when we were all going through this process. And in fact, Henry and I got to be good enough friends. As a side note, I was paid for by the home builders. I went to Florida with Henry and did a presentation at a meeting where they were putting together 1,000 Friends of Florida. And I flew to Orlando and on behalf of home builders said, this isn't a terrible deal.
Wow.
This will work really well. And then when Henry later ran for Attorney General, he came to the home builders for support. My memory is he got it. So we weren't, there was concern and there was all of this, but we got along. I mean, and the builders weren't knee-jerk opposed to the UGB. The big concern was housing prices. Where do you put the line, and you start artificially blowing up housing prices or whatever. The boundary that was eventually adopted was very large. And I'm sure you're interviewing Henry, but I can't put words in his mouth. But I always had the feeling that there was a sense that it was better to err on the large side than the small side, because this program might become so politically unpopular right off the bat that it would kill the whole idea if all of a sudden there was no place to buy a single-family house in Beaverton or Hillsborough or someplace. So it was a big boundary, which leads me to a snide remark, which is every time I hear the quote of 98% of all the development's been in the UGB. And, well, of course it was. We knew the UGB was a lot more than 20 years of land. We knew it was probably 50 years of land when we did it. So, of course, all the development, and everybody says, this is proof that it's working. No, actually, in my view, it's proof that we made it really big.
So were you involved then in the process to get that boundary approved?
Yes, yeah, on behalf of the home builders.
And you were supporting the boundary that had been...
Yeah, we bitched. We bitched in places, but no, there wasn't any lawsuits, there wasn't any big fistfights or something in it. We had worked it out, and then our emphasis became on rules, and we got involved then on a lot of the growth was really strong. I got sidetracked. Beaverton declared a moratorium on building permits right around 1980 or something like that.
Which would excite the home builders, I'm sure.
Which got us going. And also Jimmy Carter during this time in 81, interest rates went from 8 or 9% to 24%. And we organized a protest to Jimmy Carter. We bought we donated several lumber trucks with 2x4s. And they were all cut in chunks like this, and we stamped a message on the back of it. It wasn't something very nice, it wasn't obscene, but it was something to the effect of Jimmy Carter, do something about housing, you no good. And stamped them with the White House address, put a stamp on them, because in those days the post office would mail a chunk of wood if it had the right postage. And we had a big press event, and we mailed several thousand of these pieces of wood, and we made the national news to Jimmy Carter at the White House. but that was a little later on. So we were fighting with a lot of those issues.
So then, to bring it back to the program,
Yeah,
at
sorry.
that point, no, that's good stuff.
But it gives you the tenor of the
yeah,
times.
yeah.
I mean,
So at that point in time, I think the housing and urban growth goals are starting to really ramp up because
Yes.
there's a lot of cities trying to come through the door with getting LCDC approval.
yeah, the mid '80s was a lot of people coming through with.
Well, by mid-'80s, we had them all approved.
Yeah.
But in about 1980,
Yeah, that
there
period.
started to be this story, and you must know if this is true, Burton, but it used to be expressed as Thousand Friends and home builders. They see nothing in the program that they see eye to eye on except Goal 10. That
Yeah.
there was some sort of a deal, or that they're both colluding on making Goal 10 what it is, and it started to surface a lot, and I think in the '81 session
Yes.
was when you saw legislation that actually put some of that housing goal into law, and it's still there. Were
Yeah,
there
we
other
talked-
issues the
yeah.
home builders were involved in? Is
Oh
that-
yeah, and I think it's right to describe the relationship with Thousand Friends. It was never, "You're my best friend," but it was always, there was kind of this understanding that this whole Oregon process wouldn't work if it wasn't easier to build inside the urban growth boundary than outside the urban growth boundary.
Mhm.
And we were concerned that just the opposite was happening. And I think if you ask the home builders today, they still have that concern. Because we could kind of see, Clackamas County. Clackamas County had literally thousands and thousands of acres outside the urban growth boundary in large lots, which is an anathema to a developer, because a developer doesn't want to have to go buy 10 1 and 5 acre tracts to put it together in a development that is big enough to afford sewer and water.
Mhm.
So we had an agreement that we had to have not just adequate land, but we had to have rules in place that would make it so builders were welcome. Because our view of the program, and our view through Goal 10, our view of the program was, we stay out of the farmland, we get the land inside the UGBs, and no bull,
And that's kind of the way that I think that the soundbite has been transmitted
Yeah.
for a very long time, but it did begin in those years with.
Yeah, and I've made the speech to LCDC for 20 years about it should be easier inside the boundary and outside the boundary.
Yeah.
And that's when the cities kind of emerged, and I don't mean this too strong, but as the enemy of the developers. We had a very tough recession in 80, 81, 82, 83. It was a very tough recession. The builders were, hurting, and also this is when you began to see SDCs, and you began to see the real anti-growth movement, when that in 84, 5, 6 is when it started to really take off. And so we found ourselves in the situation where if you wanted to develop in Beaverton, I mentioned the moratorium they had there, for no good reason other than public pressure, we started seeing the cities as the problem. And we came more and more to LCDC, and as long as Henry was there, and for a little while after he left, we had the support of Thousand Friends on that. But that began to change, and our relationship with Thousand Friends began to change there in the 80s.
Mhm.
Too long ago to think about, but somewhere in the middle late 80s, because Thousand Friends became all wrapped up about farm and forest land and paid little or no attention. I in fact remember, I don't remember what year it was, but I remember going to, who was the director after Henry?
Bob.
Bob, was it Bob? I think it was Bob, asking them to get involved in an apartment fight in Milwaukee. That we wanted to we had a member who wanted to build an apartment house in Milwaukee. Everybody was against, the city was against it, and it was zoned, it was everything. It was ready to go. It was the perfect land, which we have very little of now. Sewer, water, zoning, everything's in place. And Thousand Friends declined to help us.
Now they had Mark Greenfield working for them at
Yes,
some of those
Mark,
years.
Mark Greenfield was involved. in this, and it wasn't personal. I mean, Bob and I are friends. Mark Greenfield and I are.
But wasn't Greenfield on there to just pay attention to city issues, or?
Well, I don't remember that. I think he was. I worked with him a lot. I know that. So maybe I didn't follow 1,000
Yeah, I might
Friends.
have that wrong too.
But we kind of got the attitude is all they care about is appealing cities that turn in plans and farmland. They didn't care that the bargain we had with Henry, that what we felt we had with Henry, was broken. And it steadily got worse over the years, and really never. And I always felt, just personally, I always felt that that's a natural alliance.
Mm-hmm.
There should have been a natural alliance between 1,000 Friends.
Well, and it sounds like for a little
and
while there
developers.
was.
It was. But it was kind of when things got tough, you know, when you had to actually go in and fight over an apartment house. Or,
Sure.
you know, and this is my jaded opinion, I think when fundraising became more important than the ideology, that, you know, how do you raise money? You don't raise money by supporting apartment houses in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you don't.
Yeah.
Or supporting a 10-unit and acre density subdivision in West Lynn or Tualatin. You don't get money for that. You get money for going out and defending farmland and saving the coast, and you know,
Yeah.
that's what happens, and I understand that. But
So now all the plans, pretty much all the plans, were acknowledged by '85.
Mhm.
And so this was taking place before the acknowledgement era concluded?
Well, during
that,
yeah, during that period of time,
Hmm.
and afterwards, because after the plans were acknowledged, everything didn't get wonderful. After the plans were acknowledged, the Milwaukee case, it's all zoned, it's planned,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
everything, and no, you can't build there.
Huh.
You know, if you want a townhouse, maybe, but if you want to build single family, we're okay. A lot of people think the developers, all they wanted to build was single family detached. Not quite true. There were some developers that's all they did, but that was also about the only thing you could build and not get appealed by a neighborhood group or not get in trouble somewhere.
So were you active in the legislature
Yeah.
that time, that tenure?
I was very active in the legislature until,
And land use, some of these issues you're talking about must have been on the docket, or,
yeah,
or were
well,
they?
remember though, I left the home builders in 1984.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to put this in context. You know, 85, I left the home builders in 85, and I got hired by Ron Wyden. He had been elected congressman, and the home builders had supported him when nobody else did in his run for Congress. And so Ron hired me as his district AA chief of staff in the district. And I worked for him for 2 years. So there was a 2-year period between 85 and 87, where I did no land use at all. So I just disappeared out of the system.
Sort of federal things that you're working on.
Because I was worrying about federal issues then.
What brought you back?
What brought me back is I realized at age 40 or whatever I was at the time, that this is too much work for somebody my age. I had 2 young sons. I was in DC 24 hours, you know, it was just miserable. Yeah. And Ron was born to be a congressman and born to be a senator, which translates to he never had a bad idea at 4 in the morning. So after a couple of years of that, I decided it's time for me to find something else. So I started Western Advocates, which was a private company to do lobbying. Mm-hmm. And again, we settled on a lot of land use stuff. And so in 80...
But state issues.
But state issues and also local, because my first clients were the Special Districts Association of Oregon, who was becoming rapidly aware of the problems that land use was giving them and their relations with cities.
And annexation issues.
And annexation issue, the famous annexation issue that I failed to pass earlier. So I was hired as their lobbyist in 86, I think it was, or 87. I was hired as their lobbyist that session. I was hired as their lobbyist, and then a year or 2 later I was hired as the lobbyist for Metro, which had been put together at somewhere in this point when Rena Kuzma was the executive director. And I was Metro's lobbyist among other clients. So I had the special districts, which most of my work was land use. I also got as a client the fire districts, Oregon Fire District Directors Association, Oregon Fire Chiefs, Oregon Fire Marshals. So I got involved in a lot of that stuff. And then before we knew it, we had 9 staff people and 22 clients.
Well, I would have expected that Metro's land use focus and issues would have consumed a lot of your time, but
Consumed an awful lot of time. Ron Cease was on the Metro board at the time. Richard Devlin was on the Metro board at the time. There was other people that, names that you know through this whole stuff, were all on the board. And we were going through, a little later, the charter changes were done during this period of time. And so I got involved in a lot of that. But I was also here in the legislature, primarily representing Metro special districts, and a little bit of the fire service was pretty much my portfolio. So my day-to-day living with DLCD really occurred with Special Districts Association and some Metro.
And so did that go on through the early 90s, and you were...
Yeah, I lose track of years.
Well, there was a pretty big land use bill in 91 that, and I lose track of the dates.
It's all blending together.
Yeah.
I can't.
But all of that statute on the priorities for urban growth, which I would imagine would have been interesting to districts and to.
Well, yeah, I was part of the little group relatively small group that negotiated the priority of land use bill. It was Mary Kyle. It was John Chandler, who was brand new to the home builders. I was there for special districts, and how quick we forget, 2 or 3 others. That was in the 90s. That was later, and I took part in those negotiations.
And those were pretty stormy years as you move into the 90s. You have, at some point, the Republicans are in charge of the legislature, and you start getting a lot of really nasty kind of anti-land use stuff that was kicked around.
There was it didn't
Maybe
matter.
all along.
It didn't matter who was governor. There was nasty stuff all along. In fact, one of the things John Kitzhaber did that I always respected was when he was still in the state Senate, he would take us all out. It was like taking us to school to Vida out in east of Eugene up the McKenzie River. He took us out there a couple of times, and it was about 20 of us. And we spent a couple of days out there trying to resolve issues and trying to work our way through stuff, trying to get it less hostile. And then when he became governor, he continued that kind of attitude. And I always respected him for that. I don't think he gets the credit in his first 2 terms that he deserves for holding the ship together.
And so were those meetings sort of during the session, or just as a preamble to the session?
This was preamble to the session. We also, I think it was preamble to some rules, some rule writing too. But the idea was to go out there and just, nobody can hear you, there's no clients in the room, and you can do what you want. Though I think at one of these, Landauer from the Oregonian was there, because I remember there was an editorial about all this. But the whole idea was to try to get some consensus around something. Out of that, before that, my favorite bill, Senate Bill 122, before I get too recent, need to talk about Senate Bill 122. Before that, and God help me, that was Barbara Roberts had just been elected governor. So
was that 88?
That was after, that was 88. I'm almost, it was 88. And I don't know if you were here yet then.
I was here. I was Willamette Valley field rep. I wasn't watching politics.
That's right. I remember. In fact,
local politics.
Yeah, when I met you, that's right. You were the Willamette Valley field rep when I first met you. I forgot about that. But in '88, everybody was unhappy, and the cities and the counties and the districts were at each other's throat. And now my focus isn't home builders, my focus is special districts. And so
And this is over cities annexing into district areas.
Everything you can
and
think
of course that.
Yeah, I mean, we special districts at the time, you know, the largest units of government after Portland in the state are 3 special districts. So we didn't consider ourselves temporary units of government that were supposed to disappear. Cities always said, well, they're an inferior government, we don't want anything to do with them, we're not going to talk to them. And we saw things like cities with absolutely terrible services, a lousy fire department, lousy water source, annexing into a district that had a great nationally recognized fire department and great water. And you know, and our argument was that's not planning. You know, planning is you're supposed to look at the big picture, and if the district needs to go away, the district goes away. That was our position. But if the district is the more efficient service provider, they should stay.
And I seem to recall that Senate Bill 122 was about 91 or 93, and I don't remember which of those two.
Yeah, it was right in there. I think it was 90. In fact, I know it was 91. And so Barbara Roberts, God bless her, she put the arm on LCDC to convene a work group, a series of work groups. We met over at the old Water Resources Department. We're over there, that over building where
Yep, I remember that. Yeah.
And we had a bunch of round tables, and we divided up. There were like 10 topics, and we divided up on those topics and came up with legislative and LCDC rules ideas to resolve these various issues. One table was annexation, one table was this and that. Table I worked on with the mayor of Beaverton, whose name escapes me, Larry something or other, or maybe, I don't know. Anyway, was the chair of our table. They did straws. And we had just an interesting group at the table, and we began to realize that, you know, annexation isn't a separate subject from agreements to work together. It's all part of the same thing. So we kind of outlined the idea of Senate Bill 122, which was that cities, counties, and districts ought to have some regular written policy on how to deal with each other.
We still call them 122 agreements.
Yeah, to this day, yeah. And remember that Senate Bill 100 had a paragraph in it that said that. And it said counties are the county coordinators, and that under Senate Bill 100, the counties were supposed to coordinate between the cities and districts. And it was right there in the bill.
Yeah.
Okay, but it was one sentence or paragraph, and didn't have any meaning. Nobody enforced it. Nobody did anything about it. So out of that group, we came out with a sheet of paper, and miraculously, we got AOC, LOC, and SDAO signed off on it. And we put a bill in, and that was Senate Bill 122. And at the hearings, all 3 of us testified in favor of the bill. It made great sense, went through the legislature and became the law. So then SDAO special districts' mission in life became implement Senate Bill 122. And that's why I probably spent more time over here than the cities did, because that was my job. That was all they wanted me to do for my money, was to get those agreements done. And here we are 15 years later, and we're still working on it. You know,
Yeah, I
had a bill last session.
There's some initial ones, but then it sort of slowed down, but I may have the wrong view about the span of it.
Well, what we did is we quickly exhausted the jurisdictions where people got along. Washington County, for example, the county manager, again, we forget names, the county manager called us all into a room. I remember that, a fire station out in Beaverton or Hillsborough, called us all in a room, and we had the cities there, the districts there, and the county representatives there. And he said, he wrote up on the board, cities don't go away. These districts don't go away. Tualatin Hills Park and Rec, Tualatin Valley Water District, Tualatin Fire and Rescue, and there might have been 1 or 2 more. Yeah, those were about Tualatin Hills Park. They're not going away. And the county is going to make sure it happens.
Yeah.
That you abide by this. He says, now, if you want to sit down and do your 122 agreement,
here's the underpinnings.
here's the underpinnings. And guess what happened? You know, we were very successful. We
Yeah.
worked it out. You know, Beaverton in the Park District, when Beaverton annexes, the Park District goes with them. You know, we worked it out, did a joint water agreement, so, you know, all the water, you know, the 3 jurisdictions out there that supply water all work together. So Washington County, magnificent Park District, Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue has been the International Firefighters, or International Fire Chiefs Association, International Best Fire Department in the world, okay, twice. But you got this super special district, it's now in 3 counties, 11 cities. You got the dream that the concept we all had. If it doesn't make sense having 16 water departments in the metro area, well, it doesn't make sense to have 16 fire departments, you know, and so that concept worked out wonderfully in Washington County. That is one of, not all the reasons, but it's one of the reasons. All the growth in Oregon, you know, until just recently has been in Washington County.
Now, so you had, of course, take this around the state and down to, well, for example,
I gave speeches
Eugene
everywhere. I gave speeches in Eugene and Medford.
And where things are not near so rosy
Yeah.
in terms of agreement between cities and districts.
But things are changing. Things have changed. In my dotage, in my retirement living in Mesquite, I got hired to come up and help facilitate a meeting between Eugene, City of Eugene School District, and the River Road Park and Rec District.
Yeah.
And now they're all working together down there to create a Park and Rec District.
So it works, it just took a while.
It just, yeah, well, what it takes for the, and this works both ways, I'm not picking on cities, it takes the districts too. It takes the ego trip to get over, it takes hard times, when budgets start going south. Eugene started wanting to talk when they were cutting the park budget. And it takes those kinds of things to happen. And you have to have a coincidence of a good leader somewhere in the mix, who can step in and say, this is stupid. Why are we laying off firefighters? Why are we building a new fire station 500 feet from the River Road fire station? Where does this make sense? And turf isn't important. You know, you begin to realize turf isn't that important. TVF&R's got the system. When they first annex into a city like West Lynn, where 80% of the voters approved the annexation, the fire truck said West Lynn for the first 4 or 5 years, and then slowly began to say Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, you know, and to give people a chance to acclimate. So it is happening. I think the SDO's relationship with LOC is better now than it's been in a long time, as you know, working on some of these rules that we've had to work on, and the bill, trying to deal with the bill issue here, 10,000 cities up, expedited urban growth boundary. I think you saw, believe me, there wasn't the hostility in that room that there was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
No, in the background, I still see the issue of annexation and voter annexation, you know, coming up now and again. I remember that it had come to the legislature in a pretty big way. Am I remembering this right? Around '97 or something. Maybe districts weren't on that. There was a move to make the voter annexation.
Big rush, for voter-approved annexation.
And the cities took that bill almost, and I think the home builders too.
Home builders hate the voter-approved annexation.
Right, and so this bill was to put an end to that.
Yeah.
And it got down to the very end, and I was trying to get Fred Venata to remember this, that was like a 1 or 2 vote loss at the end of a very long session that went off into July, but it was very close.
And it's still an issue. I mean, John Chandler had bills drafted this last session to do that.
Did he?
Yeah, they were drafted. Everybody's running around the building trying to find support. The cities are all tied in knots because they can't, even though they don't like it, they can't support it because they got Oregon City out there, and you know, and Lebanon or wherever it is, you know, all these cities, there's 9 cities or something. It's just enough that they can't really overtly support it. It's a big issue. That group that was supporting that was out of Lane County can't remember the names, but there was a group there that was doing this mad, they had a name, and they were the ones doing it, but they've kind of disappeared lately. And also places...
Something like Citizens for Voter Annexation.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
They've kind of disappeared. Part of it is because it didn't do what they wanted it to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's worked awfully in, Oregon City. It's
most of the time people vote for it.
They vote for it, yeah. Oregon City's been a disaster. Generally in Canby it's worked out. All the developer does is he just annexes 10 acres at a time, so it's a pain in the rear as opposed to any meaningful change in anything.
Big annexations are.
There's other cities, even West Lynn has approved almost every...
Salem approves everything. I don't know about Corvallis. That's
Salem,
where
Corvallis generally, I think, has a strong track. So it turned out not to be this giant anti-growth thing. It just didn't work that way.
Yeah.
So
Burton, in a little bit of time left in which we're getting to the end here, I wanted to make sure that there was some opportunity to just kind of pull back bigger and talk about, well, now from your perspective, the Oregon Land Use Program, how has it turned out? The big idea of saving farmland and natural spaces and keeping the state the way it is, and a lot of things that are, well, in some ways they're bigger pictures in the background than annexation issues, but we've been asking people to just sort of think about, well, how do you feel about it now as it's turned out, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I have always, maybe it's the planner in me 30 years ago or 40 years ago, I have always liked the idea of the program. If you go back from the very beginning, I like the idea. I thought the urban growth boundary idea was a very good one, and I still think it's a good program. I think the program has been as successful as you can be in a country that has established rights to property ownership. I think it has at times erred too much to the taken Eastern Oregon and Central Oregon issues the wrong way. I think for a long time the program didn't recognize the differences in this state. I think they're much more aware of it today than they were during the 80s and 90s. And I think a lot of the ill will that DLCD and LCDC engendered and a lot of the controversy in the legislature was people who had been basically screwed by the program. They had third generation landowners, and they'd always planned to do this or X or Y with their land, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and they're told because you can make $42 a year selling berries on your land, it's not a taking. So what about your aspirations for your life? And there was a lot of that, and that was the worst thing we did as the program evolved. But overall, I think it's been very successful on farm and forest land as you could be. I don't think I could make a suggestion that would make it better. On the, as I said earlier, on the other side of the table, on the UGB, inside the UGB service system, service districts, cities, counties, I think there is our worst failure, because I don't think there was appreciation of my stump speech I gave to you earlier. It should be easier inside than outside. I don't think it wasn't as important to the department to save farmland as it was to create a positive atmosphere for development where it was supposed to go. And then you couple that with LUBA, and that's another side story. You've got to talk to Gordon Foltz. Gordon Foltz and I came up with the idea of LUBA sitting on the couch in the old LOC building.
No, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, that was at 79 or?
Yeah. We were sitting on the couch. It was earlier than that. We were sitting on the couch thinking, we'd gotten some really ridiculous decision out of some circuit court that had reversed something. And, well, we ought to have this. So we went over and started talking it up. And it took off. Surprised us both.
Yeah, I'm probably misremembering. I said 79, maybe 78, because LUBA didn't officially exist, but you're saying it was in the thought stage.
Yeah, it was Barbara Roberts was governor. I remember that much. It was during that little interlude, I think, that it became law. But we started talking about it. We went over and talked to LB Day. We talked to LB about it. We talked to other people and started saying, what about a land use court? You know, with the idea being that you'd get in and out quickly, and you know, so forth and so on, and that's another story. But anyway,
Yeah.
LUBA, what we didn't anticipate was that making the appeals real cheap would result in so many. I mean, I don't mean Gordon and I mean all of us that were involved in this in the legislature. And we also didn't realize how groups like Thousand Friends and others would just treat LUBA as a way station. We thought there was kind of an agreement that, you know, LUBA was going to be it. You know, unless there was some totally egregious, terrible decision, LUBA was it. The whole idea was to stop all these appeals, you know, or to get them over quickly. And that didn't happen. All of a sudden, if there was a decision that meant anything at all, it was immediately off to the Court of Appeals. And then we also didn't appreciate that LUBA would become a fundraising tool for environmental groups. And I'll just say it since I'm not here. Oregon Shores Coalition, they routinely use it as a fundraising. So they say, you know, we're stopping this terrible project on the Oregon coast, put it on their website, and you got to fundraise, we're stopping this terrible development. That was used against me and U.S. Borax twice. It was used against other projects on the coast, as I'm aware of. We always won. We'd always go to LUBA, and in fact, the last one we did, Tim Ramus is our attorney for U.S. Borax. The young lady, I won't say who she is, the young lady actually apologized to us at the end of it because it was so embarrassing. The LUBA referees were, why are you here? Well, they were here because they were raising money on their website and about this supposed development, and it was a development inside the UGB, already zoned.
Planned, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was done. It was a DDP development plan within the master plan that they appealed. Well,
Yeah.
they were in the city limits.
Yeah.
I mean, all they were doing was raising money. So there's a lot of that. There's 2 or 3 groups out there that raised money doing that kind of stuff. Thousand Friends, I don't believe does that. I know they don't do it recently. They have, but they're not out there appealing stuff that they don't think they can win.
Sure.
But there are groups that actually appeal stuff with the young law school graduates that are doing it to raise money. That's something we didn't think about when we were doing this. So summary, get this over with. I think the program's done a lot of good, but I think the program ignored urban issues way too long. Rode the coattails of the popularity of saving farmland, the popularity of stopping sprawl, all the buzzwords. I think they did that way too long. It's fine in the beginning, but I think they did it about 10 years too long in the 90s and lost an opportunity to make the program balanced. And my last couple of years working with the department, I felt the department sincerely understood that.
And was heading in the right direction.
And was heading in the right direction, but we lost so much time, and we just really lost an awful lot of time.
Yeah.
And finally, the other failing is economic development. The state has assumed that role and is doing their thing, but on the TGM committee, which I think I chaired 8 years or something. Damn.
Did you really?
Yeah.
And we didn't even talk about transportation.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. But on the TGM committee, I really became aware of a lot of the disconnect between planning, the local government, transportation dollars, and just I really became aware of that. In the TGM, we tried to coordinate, tried very hard to coordinate, and did in a lot of ways did a good job. But
that those dollars were
in the
at
right
least lined
place.
up with other dollars that were coming in from other sources.
And really realized the depth of the disconnect between ODOT, DLCD, cities, counties, and districts, and just all of that. And we did the work of the Lord on TGM, and very successfully, I think, to make it fit better and work better. But again, it was 10 years too late.
Yeah.
Plus, we never really, economic development really didn't enter into our language And when I see, now I'm a 2-year Nevada resident, though I still have property up here, I see the way they approach economic development in Nevada, and I just go, you know, why didn't we deal with this? Why didn't we do with this? You know, why weren't we just up front, you know, and coordinated all this stuff?
And you see that more as a model that, for example, TGM has worked towards more
yes,
coordination.
and the only problem at TGM, we had this very small pot of money to make this happen.
Yeah.
You know, if we'd have been able to, if there had been a TGM for economic development, ODOT, DLCD, and the local government representatives, 3 associations, and the home builders, then we might have got something done, because then we'd have been able to say, look, Lebanon, I'm making this up, Lebanon has got a great project down here. You know, a great idea, a great way to revitalize that downtown and make it happen, but it's a service supply issue, it's a transportation issue, and it's a funding the developer with some low-income loan issue, and having a group that all sits around the table and says, let's do it. Kitzhaber tried that with he had monthly meetings with all the department heads. And he tried that, and I got invited to a few of those. And he tried it, but it was too big, and it had too many departments. We don't need to talk about fish and wildlife in the, you know, or even DEQ. We're in the middle of downtown Lebanon. What we need is we need sewer, we need, you know, we need all this and this and this. That's where we've gone wrong. In Nevada, and I'm 2 months into this, was just appointed to the Mesquite Regional Business.
I see.
And I'm now
in the thick of it.
I'm now one of 5 board members of a group that does just that. We are getting a new interchange in Nevada off of I-15, and we're all working together. Who's going to build here? Working with the people that want to be there, Flying J. We're working with, you know, make sure we have an Applebee's here and all this stuff. So this whole interchange is going to go up and be connected to the industrial area and have just enough services so the truck drivers and the industrial people, you know, can have what they need to make them want to stop there at the hotel little hotel we're going to build for truck drivers. It's all coordinated. You know, state money, NDOT money, everything is coordinated. Land use approvals, everything's coordinated.
Well, that's maybe a good note to leave it on. But I mean, it is something we've talked about. We've talked about again and again. If we could just have a lot more coordination, and you know, we didn't get a chance to touch on that, but that was in the very beginning. Coordination shows up how many times in Senate Bill 100?
Yeah, it's right through the process, all the way through. And it just never quite happens. And I understand why. I mean, you know, cities don't want to cede authority to anybody.
Yeah.
But I think we're maturing in this state. I think cities, counties, and districts and the state is beginning to realize that nobody's more equal than anybody else when it comes to getting economic development where we want it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't do any good for the state to go bribe a Japanese company or a Chinese company to come here if the locals don't want it, or if the site isn't right, or whatever. I'll leave you with this thought. And I always hated people when they came from California. Well, in California we did it this way, so here I am doing the same thing.
But there's a new flavor. We haven't got this with the Nevada wording.
The Nevada wording, yeah. Nevada's a different state. There's a lot of it I wouldn't want to bring to Oregon. But lost my thought. What my final thought was. But overall, I think it's been a successful program. We just got off the track. We got too in love with promoting farmland, not the actual promoting of it, but the talking about. Commission meetings for years, that's all they were about. Goal 10 issues were off on a subcommittee that you and I both been on 14 times. Goal 11, Goal 14 subcommittees.
Yeah.
It was always just afterthought. And there was kind of this ideal development will take care of itself and economic development will take care of itself. And that hasn't happened. This state is suffering. You get outside of the Portland metropolitan area and in Salem and Eugene, even Eugene, this state has got real problems, and we've done very, very little. And I'm telling you, the state having a loan program is not what solves or helps economic development programs. Traveling around the world with booths and having all this stuff, it is not what makes a deal. It's not what gets a company to come. its stability and planning, its availability of streets, water, sewer, its community attitude that is behind whatever it is they want to see developed in this area. It's having adequate industrial land. It's having good access to major transportation nodes. Those are all things that I believe are under the purview of this program in cooperation with the cities and counties and districts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest failing. That's my speech.
Wow. Well,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. No, I really appreciate it. I think all of this thinking is something that you almost wish that there had been a much wider audience. I don't know whether that's going to be the case with these interviews, but really good stuff, Burton.
Well, it's fun. It's fun to be back in your office.
Hopefully I can figure out the technique.